So good afternoon, Luc, and thank you for sharing some time with me today.
Absolutely, Dr. Luc.
Looking to get a better sense of the so-called globally environmental compliance system and services that companies in the U.S. Have to follow and be in compliance with.
Yeah, definitely. So generally, really, environmental compliance, you need to kind of think about it as first understanding what the applicable regulations are for your company and for really each site in your company. Uh, One of the beautiful things about the United States is we are an assemblage of states, but this makes some of these regulations fairly confusing because most of this framework is produced by Congress at a federal level, but then the states are actually implementing their own state by state programs for air, waste, water, hazardous materials, really just any type of environmental compliance system. The way that this is set up by the federal government is that states can overregulate, but they can't underregulate the federal standard. So there's a baseline set by Congress. This is maybe adopted by 50% of the states, where they basically say this is good enough, and then some states will add their own nuances, and then you have really California as their own, essentially their own framework of all governments. We talked about Prop 65. They have their own special twist on essentially every regulation and often have significantly stricter standards. So there's some additional complexity if you're working in, between Texas and California. These are two states that have large environmental regulatory frameworks, but they have their own nuances. So generally for environmental compliance, the regulations tell you what you need to do if something applies to your facility. Once you've determined that that actually does apply, pretty much across the board, there's a management component where you're actually collecting data on some sort of frequency. It might be discharge of water into a waterway from a facility. It might be waste that you're producing each month and that you need to find a place to dispose it correctly. It could be air emissions. You actually need to go through the process of managing the data collection, kind of ongoing compliance within, say, a permit, which might set an emission limit for you. So essentially, it gives you you know what applies to you. Then you're collecting the actual data throughout the year and making sure that you're staying within the rules. But really, the government doesn't give any points for collecting the data. You then have to actually comply with the regulations, which generally involve actually submitting forms to regulatory agencies. But then almost as important is documenting that submission has happened, and then documenting your internal processes. So if in the event you get maybe an audit, EPA wants to check something out at your site, OSHA wants to check something out, you have a good record of what your operations, revolving around compliance actually entail. And just generally being able to back up that you've put in a good faith effort. Kind of similarly, it sounds like to authoring safety data sheets, you really need to have this kind of like intellectual record of like why decisions have been made, so that it's defensible. If anybody has any questions. So it's a big complex space. There are kind of like 4 big program areas in air, waste, water, and then chemicals. But then there's a whole lot of kind of like, nuances. You can get all the way down into county level requirements for, if it rains more than an inch at your construction site within 24 hours, you need to take a sampling and put together a report for, like stormwater runoff, stuff like that.
Are you saying that this environmental compliance has to match, as I heard, I think, has to be reported both to each of the states that you operate and the federal government, or is there a link between the federal and the states?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for the most part, you wouldn't need to actually submit the same report to the state and the federal government. There are some programs where, like for a concrete example, toxic release inventory reporting, which is part of EPCRA, which is the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act, that is ran by the EPA. So if you are a toxic release inventory facility, you only need to submit that report to the EPA. However, within EPCRA, there's also Tier 2 reporting. This is set by the EPA, but then administered by the states. So if you have a facility in Ohio and a facility in Indiana, for instance, and they're both filing TRI and Tier 2, you'll use the same system to file the TRI, but then Indiana has their own Tier 2 system and Ohio has their own Tier 2 system. And they are similar-ish, but they function in really different ways. They require different information. Kind of at a basic level, like they might want to know some additional information about your facility's operations. Are you a family farm? Are you a like a municipality-owned property? All the way down to actual chemical level. Like different health hazards. Oregon has their own system of physical and health hazard requirements for a Tier 2 report chemical that Indiana does not. So this actually ties into safety data sheets as well, because for a lot of reports, they begin with your material. So you want to know what is actually in this material. And interestingly enough, on safety data sheets, many of them have the SARA Title III applicability section, which ties into your EPCRA programs if you need to do, kind of initial notifications. If you've brought a material on site that you haven't had before, you need to get the safety data sheet from the supplier. If you're producing it yourself, you need to author it. Then you have to notify the local emergency planning committee and your state emergency response commission that you have that chemical on site and what quantity you have. And then annually, you need to submit a report giving kind of the maximum amount and location of that chemical at your site throughout the year, and do that for every chemical. So for some people, one of the things with environmental compliance is it's a little bit like taxes. It all depends on who you are, on how hard it's going to be. So one report might be pretty easy for a certain facility. They might only have relatively straightforward operations, maybe file a couple reports a year. There could be other facilities that are filing 30 reports a month on the low end and have really like a full-time team just to manage that compliance reporting.
It sounds a bit like when we talked before about the globally harmonized system. It sounds pretty disharmonized.
Exactly.
And so to help with this so-called disharmonizations, or the state and federal and specifics, I do hope that technology can help and will help your customers or manufacturers in the U.S. to achieve that.
Yeah, 100%. So, I think technology really is the future of this space, and that could be said for a lot of different spaces, but especially in environmental compliance, very similar actually to the GHS system and the software that you and your companies have developed. Really, at the root of the problem is essentially a large database that you need to assemble that contains essentially rule-based applicability on location and then other qualifiers. So state by state, really building a system that what we refer to as a 50 state aware system. It knows that there is a difference if your zip code is in Texas compared to Arizona. And it all sort of feeds off of that. So really starting with kind of location, and then having these databases that are, enriched to really help you navigate that. I think that is the wave of the future that's already happening in this space, and I think it's only going to be accelerating. Where we're in a place where generally the government is pushing for more digital transformation. There's a huge paper, kind of like paperwork overload at a lot of state and federal agencies, where they are getting hundreds of thousands of pages of paper reports that they are trying to type into their systems, which are software. This is not very efficient, as you can imagine. So a lot of copy pasting back and forth and hand entering. So the government's moving towards trying to push people to have more like software-based systems that make the data transfer easier and really help with the data integrity as well. A lot of errors happen when you're just typing things in the same number a bunch of different times. It's pretty likely you'll make a mistake sometime. And then especially for, I would say, for submission. So there's software that can really help you understand, what are your compliance requirements, help assemble your applicability for each facility, and can help you even collect the data, kind of manage your process. But even if you've done that, it really all does come down to, can you comply with the law by actually making sure that you finalize it? The end-to-end submission is what you really need to shoot for. This is an area where there's a lot of opportunity to increase efficiency, because people are spending a lot of time collecting data, getting it organized, making sure it's in the right format, which is fantastic. But once they've done that, they still have to basically re-enter in all of this data in another system. And likely someone will take that data from that system and re-enter it into another system. So there's a lot of just latency built into this, where people are kind of being forced to work in more antiquated systems, and a lot of opportunity for improvement. And I think there's a lot of excitement in the space on basically looking around and saying, like, hey, if financial and marketing professionals and all these folks have custom software built for them, why don't EHS professionals and chemists, the people really like working to make sure the materials we are surrounded by are safe, and that we rely on, frankly, why don't they have the tools to make their job easier? And really, if you take a look at kind of the status quo as is, it's a little bit lacking in just sort of modern technology that a lot of people assume are in a lot of different industries. And I would say they're catching up, but the environmental health and safety space has been underserved, I'd say, by technology, but that's really changing pretty rapidly, I would say.
Well, I guess what I'm hearing, that digital transformation that the governments are looking at, this is kind of the heart of the solution that Encamp is proposing their customers, not to actually retype and copy paste and make mistakes all the time. So your system and your service actually kind of globalize all of this information while it's streamlined these for each of the state requirements, I understand?
Exactly. Yep. So really the idea with Encamp and the Encamp software platform is that it provides companies one unified place to view and manage their entire environmental compliance program, all the way from their compliance calendar that's just going to say, when do I actually need to do this work, all the way to automating submissions, so that when you hit the button, our scripts actually make sure that that is submitted to the regulatory agencies without anyone, including us, having to type it in. And so, eliminating a lot of that time cost, and also then decreasing the risk of non-compliance. One of the things that we really do to achieve this is thinking about the entire compliance cycle rather than individual kind of points within it. So it really does start with just understanding what your applicability is. So our system actually integrates with federal databases. So based on your facility's name and location, we can pull in a lot of your compliance specific information, regulatory IDs that apply to your facility, applicable regulations that you fall under. All of that happens automatically with onboarding. And then this is used to generate your applicability profile and reporting calendar for the year. So that's kind of to get started. Then we actually do have our management system, so you can assign tasks to different people, upload spreadsheets, move data through the system to actually meet your requirements being tracked on your calendar. And then really the kind of the cherry on top for our system is the automated submissions, where once you're actually set up, your data is good to go, it passes the Encamp validation, you can be confident that that's going to be ready to get sent to a regulator. You hit the button and it's sent off. We actually log the report in your digital filing cabinet, so you have a record, which is really important. And again, cuts out someone having to download that, save it into a share drive. There's just really trying to remove any clicks that we can. And so to our customers, we're at 169 customer companies right now, spanning all 50 states in the U.S. and Puerto Rico. It's just a lot of opportunity to turn what might be 50 different ways to do your compliance into one central system, where you might have different activities based on what state you're in, but you have one interface, one place to look at, even where am I at on my reporting schedule? Do I have a lot of open tasks that I was unaware of. Really the idea is it's much better to be proactive than reactive in compliance. And one of the best things to do to become more proactive is get a good idea of what you actually, are dealing with. What's your compliance, profile across all your sites? What's your liabilities? And then go from there.
So we could very well say that in 2020, the solution for harmonization of the environmental compliance would be the Encamp solution.
That's what we're going for. That's what we're going for.
Because frankly, at this point, and I appreciate the expertise that you're sharing with us, but obviously, I think view from your perspective is kind of immediately logical, simple, straightforward. I mean, if it's to copy paste the same thing for this state and not this one and so on, it's like a software that would globally classify chemicals around the world, but let's say 40, 50 states, and making sure that your customers are in compliance without having to, as we said, retype and unfortunately making some mistakes. So we can understand that for companies that are not moving into that direction, there's a lot of risk they can anticipate, unfortunately.
Yeah, so that's a really good question, Dr. Luc. I would say so there are a couple different types of risks. So to begin with, you do just have the risk of non-compliance. So anytime that you're typing in anything, if you make a clerical error and it gets caught, that might come back to you with a notice of violation, a fine of some kind. So you want to avoid that. I would say in addition to that, there is just kind of some general changes happening in the space. I think two of the things that I've seen a lot is the workforce is evolving. So an aging workforce is getting close to retirement, and they have so much knowledge right now. And a lot of people's biggest concern actually is continuity planning, because when those people leave, if they've been holding down the entire system, if you don't have a good plan in place, you're going to immediately run into a problem where you're dropping some things through the cracks, and then you might be in a lot worse shape than you were the year before. I think the kind of promise of a software-based system is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel once you've implemented it, and this gives you a system that is easier to hand off to different people. And it's not just retirement. I would say like a lot of people are maybe more not gig work, but maybe seasonal workers in warehouses. They could be tasked with collecting inventory data for a report. They're not an EHS specialist, but someone is saying, go take this clipboard, go collect this. If they leave the next year, you have to have a system in place to train those people and keep it all going, because really compliance is never done. It's a continual process, just like, safety data sheets. You have to constantly review on a monthly and yearly basis, right? What's changing? Are we still in good shape? So not having I'd say a digital system is the best way, but really this is the idea of ISO as it applies to environmental in general. Just having a framework that is defined will put you miles ahead of not having a framework. And then software, the great part about software is someone else has built your framework for you. So you get a lot of functionality, kind of out of the box, instead of having to, start from scratch and build it all in Excel and share drives and SharePoint and stuff like that. Finally, then I think, the risk of not doing this is that this is an inevitability. And I think, it's interesting. We're living in COVID times, and, a takeaway of this entire experience is if you can see something coming in the future, it is dangerous to ignore that is happening, because the bill comes due at the end, right? So you're gonna have to deal with this at some point. So I think really just even for kind of the competitive advantage, there are a lot of companies that are now treating building an EHS and sustainability kind of like core system as being part of their bottom line in a way that is quite different from even 10 years ago, and especially 20 or 30 years ago. There's just a lot more pressure for companies to stay current. And I'd say kind of the final thing about this, stakeholder engagement has probably never been more important, because with the internet, people can find all sorts of things about companies. So kind of the the desire to be a good citizen as a company has probably never been higher, because you can quickly lose public support if something comes out that you've been skirting around some environmental laws. That's never a popular thing to do, I would say, kind of regardless of politics. It's hard to get behind companies like lying to conceal that they're secretly polluting the environment. So kind of with increased digitization from the government's end, there's increased accessibility to that data. So like you can just go look at people's TRI reports online in the EPA. So if you're a company that needs to file that, you are wiser to file it and make sure you file it right, just to kind of be a good citizen and make sure that you're minimizing any risks. Actually, the final thing I would add to that, if I may, right. In this evolving workforce, also, there's kind of an interesting kind of demographic change that's happening in EHS. So, kind of the old guard is primarily male, and the new guard is primarily female. So, there are more women in EHS jobs under the age of 35 than men, and they are primarily college educated and used to software. And I would say for every business, you always need to be recruiting talent. And for a lot of people, I would say having a good software system is going to quickly become kind of a must-have to retain your best employees, because it just makes their lives so much better. Outside of any of the other benefits, there's just kind of a quality of life factor that I think will be important for companies to stay on top of as they move into the 2020s and beyond.
Great statement. In fact, it's all about three words. I think it's harmonization, standardization, but still differentiations, because as we just said, there's no globally harmonized systems anywhere. There's a concept, there's some tools, there's differences, and I see all around the United States, even if it's 50 states are part of the same countries, you must be on top of the specifics requirements, and therefore the software and databases that you guys are putting together are kind of essentials.
Yeah, we like to think so. And this is a perfect opportunity for us to co-announce that KMK and SGHS Plus and Encamp are officially partnering together to create, kind of endorse each other's programs as, what we believe is the gold standard for managing your safety data sheets, and then also managing your compliance reporting that will stem from what's in your safety data sheets, what's in your inventory. So, yeah, Dr. Luc, we're excited for the future that we're partnering and building together.
We're very excited both at KMK and SGHS Plus as well. As a matter of fact, the basic for our business to team up is obviously we want to work with the same customers with the same chemicals. So a lot of data would come out of there and be able to fill our applications and services all around. So from cradle to grave, that those manufacturers, distributors, blenders all over the US and Canada and the world can benefit from the teamship that we put together. Very, very excited on our side as well.
Yes, we are excited as well. So, well, Dr. Luc, it's been fantastic having you on. I want to thank you for your time and the conversation. It's always really interesting to talk together. I would love to have you on in the future. Maybe we can touch base, in a couple months and talk about how our partnership's going, and then maybe give some updates on how coronavirus might be continuing to impact our spaces, and just chat.
Thank you so much, Luc, for the webinar, and I look forward to come back and discuss the future and the recent and long-term future for the partnership and for the situation that our populations lives actually. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.